friends who have joined us in celebrating centenary of a man called Professor Harbans Singh, who had become an institution in his own lifetime. We all know Harbans Singh was a distinguished teacher, distinguished scholar, and a great administrator. As secretary of the Commission for establishing a university, it was he who set up the university in Patiala. Then he had a vision. Vision was that it should be university with a difference. This was the only university named after a language, Punjabi University. Then his dream was how to create academic atmosphere. Imagine what he did. He got the university inaugurated by a most distinguished teacher. Guess, Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, a great teacher and President of India. I was a young student. I listened to the inaugural address by Dr. Radhakrishnan. And if you wish, you can see this. Dr. Radhakrishnan, inaugural address of the university. On the left side, next to him, sitting is the Governor N.V. Gardigal. At the back, the Maharaja Patiala, who was chairman of the commission. In the center, Sir Pratap Singh Gairo, the great chief minister. And then Bhai Singh, the founder, first vice chancellor. He also had a dream to set up a department of comparative study of religion. And again, he looked for a great teacher, Dr. Zakir Hussain, who all know under the influence of Mahatma Gandhi, Zakir Hussain started Jamia Millia Islamia, a new concept of university, Nayi Talim. Zakir Hussain was again a great teacher, and this was a great experiment. Guru Gobind Singh Bhavan, this remains a landmark of the university. On the road, you watch the great monument created by Professor Harbans Singh. Now, his next concern was, this is his gift to the university, Guru Gobind Singh Bhavan, with 5 chairs, like 5 boats in an ocean. And only department of its time, Dr. Paramvir Singh, who's heading this department, he'll tell us more about it. Now, I'd like to make one comment. The university started, this is a very important room in Patiala. This place called Barandari Palace, Rajendra Palace of Maharaja Rajendra Singh. This room number 1, is converted into a hotel. And this is called Ala Room. Baba Ala Singh was the founder. University started from this room with Professor Harbans Singh as the first registrar of the university. And then the Encyclopaedia of Sikhism, imagine the monumental work he did. While doing the work, he got a paralytic attack. He prayed, and God listened to his prayer that please allow me time to finish the last volume. It's rather emotional when he checked the proofs of the last volume, signed, correct, compare and print. He was no more after that. That was his faith, and that was Harbans Singh. Now we got this volume released, volume first, released in the Rashtrapati Bhavan. Dr. Shankardar Sharma, the President of India, is carrying the first copy. With him is Gyani Zail Singh, again a family friend who was also the President of India. And he published his book called Guru Gobind Singh during the 350th birth anniversary of Guru Gobind Singh. This was the best book, who he reprinted with his daughter's permission, distributed free in Padma. People in Patna felt very proud. They said, Bihari Puttar, Bihar ka Puttar, son of Bihar, is the 10th Guru, the last Guru. And they valued this book. And this is the tribute paid by our friend, Dr. Paramvir Singh, who is heading the Department of Encyclopaedia of Sikhism. which appropriately has been renamed as Professor Harbans Singh Department of Encyclopaedia. He will introduce. I'll say one more word and then I'm done. Welcome S.Tarlochan Singh, who is chairing the session. He had a very distinguished career in government service with Punjab Chief Minister Gyani Zail Singh. Later on, he was his additional press secretary when Gyani ji became the President of India. S.Tarlochan Singh helped the minorities and particularly the Sikhs as chairman of the National Commission for Minorities. For 6 years, he championed the cause of popular people as member of the upper house, the Rajya Sabha. But he remains active even now. So far as S.Tarlochan Singh is a permanent ambassador, not a temporary ambassador. Now, on a rather short notice, when I discovered 6th March was the birth centenary of Professor Harbans Singh, I thought of my friend Professor Mark Juergensmeyer. I remember how Professor Harbans Singh, Professor Mark Juergensmeyer, and our late friend Dr. N.S. Kapani thought of introducing Sikh studies. It started with a conference arranged by Mark, the Sikh studies, comparative perspectives on a changing tradition. This, I think, was the first conference where all distinguished teachers were there debating, and luckily the volume was published. This remains the best source book so far. And then, I don't know how he persuaded, Harbans Singh never liked traveling. But how Mark persuaded him? Harbans Singh went to Berkeley, gave 3 important lectures on Sikhism, published in a book. I may be becoming a little irrelevant, but I get emotional. When he returned after giving the lectures, midnight, I went to receive him at the airport. He stayed with us. He had a gift for my wife and for my daughters, but nothing for me. I said, this is very unfair. Asked Mahendra Singh anything. I said, give me those lectures. With little hesitancy, he gave me those lectures, and we published when I was the director of Guru Nanak Foundation, this Berkeley lectures on Sikhism. This is being reprinted time and again because they are very popular lectures. This again was the initiative of our friend Professor Mark Juergensmeyer. And again, the Sikh history and religion in the 20th century. Since I was coordinating from India with Mark, I remember how were sterling. There were no emails, I think. This telegrams and difficult telephones, arranging Garewa, arranging Amrik Singh, all that. But luckily that went well. The Sikh history and religion in the 20th century, the book, which promoted Sikh studies in Canada. And if I remember correctly, Mark, this led to the establishment of first chair of Punjabi studies in the University of Vancouver. Am I right? I think chair of Punjabi studies with Harjot as its first occupant. Now, S.Tarlochan Singh, we all know, he's a very popular leader and we celebrated. He has been arranging to ensure that all meritorious people get recognized with Padma Bhushans. But he never was given one. This time his friend Hardeep Puri, who's Union Minister, ensured that even S.Tarlochan Singh should be honored, and we offer him greetings. S.Tarlochan Singh has been awarded Padma Bhushan this year, and he has agreed to chair this important lecture. Now, I request, before I request Mark, Professor Paramvir Singh, to say a few words about Professor Harbans Singh, who has been a source of inspiration for most of us. And then we request Professor Mark Juergensmeyer to give this afternoon, or maybe in his country, this evening's lecture. Dr. Paramvir Singh.
Honorable President, audible?
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay, thank you. Honorable President S.Tarlochan Singh Ji, Dr. Mahinder Singh Ji, a renowned Sikh figure in Delhi. So, Professor Mark, first of all, I congratulate Dr. Mahinder Singh Ji for organizing this lecture on the occasion of 100th birth anniversary of Dr. Professor Harbans Singh Ji. As most of the listeners or most of the our esteemed guests know about Professor Harbans Singh, who was a renowned scholar of Sikh religion and history. He was born in Kothaguru, a remote village in Bhushan district, but he achieved the academic heights. And he appointed the visiting professor in Harvard. So it was a great achievement, academic achievement of Professor Harbans Singh. So due to his hard work and dedication, he became, during his lifetime, a legendary figure in the world of learning, especially in the field of Sikh studies. The colleagues of Professor Harbans Singh remember his scholarly dedication, discipline, administrative efficiency, loyalty to the university, and performance of work. Everybody knows about Professor Harbans Singh's dedication toward his work. So he was the founder registrar, as told by Professor Dr. Mahinder Singh Ji. So he was the founder registrar of the university and worked hard to build it administratively and scholarly. He established first of its kind Guru Gobind Singh Bhavan, Guru Gobind Singh Department of Religious Studies for comparative study of religions. He was the spirit behind this monumental building as shown in the picture by Dr. Mahinder Singh Ji. So of the university. So everybody knows about Professor Harbans Singh. He was eminent scholar as well as institution builder. As you know, the Guru Gobind Singh Bhavan comprises the 5 sections for the study of different religions. All the sections are united at the top, giving the message of unity in diversity. This symbolic structure of the university was a joint vision of Sardar Kirpal Singh Narang, the then Vice Chancellor, and Professor Harbans Singh. So at present, the building houses the Department of Religious Studies and the Department of Encyclopaedia of Sikhism. His remarkable understanding of Sikhism, profound knowledge of English and Punjabi languages, and systematic presentation of the facts helped him emerge as a great scholar in the Sikh world. He devoted his life to the Sikh studies and delivered lectures and abroad and in the foreign universities. As said Dr. Mahinder Singh, that he was a visiting professor in Harvard and he delivered lectures in Berkeley University. So the lectures he delivered at Berkeley, Kyoto, McGill universities had earned him recognition and appreciation in Sikh studies. So he produced more than a dozen of valuable books on Sikhism. What is monumental work, the Encyclopaedia of Sikhism. So this volume contains more than 3,000 entries in 4 volumes, showcasing the history of Sikh religion, Sikh philosophy, Sikh institution, Sikh faith, and code of conduct. There are different entries by the different scholars. More than 300 scholars were attached with this project during the time of Professor Harbans Singh. Member Secretary of Punjabi University Patiala, of Punjabi University Commission. It was formed during Pratap Singh Cairo. So he was the founder registrar, the first registrar, first professor of Sikhism at Punjabi University Patiala, and first head of the department of Guru Gobind Singh Department of Religious Studies, the first department of its kind in India, and editor of the Journal of Religious Studies. So I came when I was reading an article by Professor Dr. Amrit Singh, the former Vice Chancellor, what he said about Dr. Harbans Singh, Professor Harbans Singh. He said that in 1977, Professor Harbans Singh refused to accept Vice Chancellorship at Punjabi University Patiala. So this is known, his dedication towards his work. He refused the post of Vice Chancellorship just to complete the 4-volume Encyclopaedia. So Harbans Singh had worked with complete dedication for full 3 decades. He refused to accept any other assignment, including the Vice Chancellorship of the university, and continued to work uninterruptedly on the project in hand. He was lucky enough to have completed it before. This is what Dr. Amrit Singh told about or said about Professor Harbans Singh. So he wrote very few in Punjabi language. So, but what he wrote in Punjabi language. So one of his writing before me, in which he appreciated or in which he remember his village Kotha Guru. And I want to speak something in Punjabi language. So what he wrote about Kotha Guru in his writings. So ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ Kotha Guru ਪਿੰਡ, he is talking about the Kotha Guru village in Bhatinda district, and he is telling Kotha Guru ਮੇਰੇ ਦਿਲ ਨੂੰ ਜੋ ਨਿਆਰੀ ਧੂਪ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਸੀ, ਉਹ ਮੈਂ ਅੱਜ ਤੱਕ ਕਿਧਰੋਂ ਹੋਰ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤੀ. This is what he said about Kotha Guru village. ਨਾ ਪਟਿਆਲੇ, ਨਾ ਲੰਡਨ, ਨਾ ਵਾਸ਼ਿੰਗਟਨ, ਨਾ ਰੈਸਟਨ, ਜਿੰਨਾ ਚਿਰ ਨਾਨੀ ਜੀ ਜਿਉਂਦੇ ਰਹੇ, ਮੇਰੀਆਂ ਗਰਮੀਆਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਛੁੱਟੀਆਂ ਕੋਠਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਬਤੀਤ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ. ਹਰ ਉਹ 3 ਮਹੀਨੇ ਤਾਸ਼ ਜਾਂ ਪਾਸ਼ਾ ਖੇਡਣ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਿਤਾ ਦੇਣੇ. ਮੇਰੇ ਪੁਰਾਣੇ ਮਿੱਤਰ, ਮਾਮੇ, ਭਰਾ ਸਾਰੇ ਹੈਰਾਨ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਤਾਸ਼ ਪਾਸ਼ੇ ਦਾ ਐਡਾ ਸ਼ੁਦਾਈ ਇਹ 4 ਅੱਖਰ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਗਿਆ. ਮੇਰਾ ਜਨਮ ਕੋਠਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਦਾ ਹੀ ਹੈ. ਬਚਪਨ ਸਾਰਾ, ਜਾਂ ਇਉਂ ਕਹਿ ਲਵੋ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਦਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰਾ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਜਦ ਮੈਂ ਪਿਤਾ ਜੀ ਪਾਸ ਫਿਰੋਜ਼ਪੁਰ ਜਾਂ ਮੁਕਤਸਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਕੋਠਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਲੰਘਿਆ. ਇਹੀ ਕੋਠਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਵਾਲੇ ਦਿਨ ਮੇਰੇ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਲਾਡਲੇ ਪਿਆਰੇ ਦਿਨ ਸਨ. ਖੁਸ਼ੀਆਂ ਨਾਲ ਲੱਦੇ ਮਹਿਕਾਂ ਖਲੇਰਦੇ. So this is what he said about Kotha Guru, his village. One thing which I want to say about Gyani Balwant Singh Kotha Guru, he was also a renowned scholar of Nirmala tradition. He belonged to Nirmala tradition, but he worked hard in studies, and he was very closely associated with Professor Harbans Singh. And his work, what he has produced during his lifetime. So ਇੱਕ ਜੋ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਗਿਆਨੀ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਦੱਸਿਆ, what he told me, ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਮਿਲਣ ਗਿਆ ਗਿਆਨੀ ਜੀ, ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੂੰ, ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਮਿਲਣ ਗਿਆ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਗਿਆਨੀ ਜੀ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਿੰਡ ਚੱਲੋ ਕਿਸੇ ਦਿਨ. ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪਿੰਡ ਦੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਯਾਦ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ. ਤਾਂ ਗਿਆਨੀ ਜੀ ਕਹਿਣ ਲੱਗੇ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਡਰਾਈਵਰ ਵੀ ਹੈ, ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਕਾਰ ਵੀ ਹੈ, ਮੈਂ ਆ ਜਾਵਾਂਗਾ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੇ ਪਿੰਡ ਲੈ ਜਾਵਾਂਗਾ ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਿੰਡ ਦੇਖ ਲਿਓ. ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਕਹਿਣ ਲੱਗੇ ਕਿ ਨਹੀਂ, ਹੁਣ ਪਿੰਡ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ ਮੈਂ, ਹੁਣ ਸੰਭਵ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ. ਫਿਰ ਇਹ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਪਿੰਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੇਰੇ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਬਾਹਰ ਇੱਕ ਕੁੰਡਾ ਲੱਗਿਆ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀ. ਉਸ ਕੁੰਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਮੈਂ ਛੋਟੇ ਬਚਪਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਖੇਡਿਆ ਕਰਦਾ ਸੀ. ਚੰਗਾ ਹੋਵੇ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੁੰਡਾ ਲਿਆ ਦੇ. ਗਿਆਨੀ ਜੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਪਿੰਡ ਗਿਆ, ਦਰਵਾਜ਼ੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੁੰਡਾ ਲਾਇਆ, ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਚੇਨ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਚੇਨ ਵਾਲਾ ਕੁੰਡਾ ਸੀ, ਉਹ ਲਾਇਆ, ਸਾਫ਼ ਕੀਤਾ, ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੂੰ ਲਿਆ ਕੇ ਦੇ ਦਿੱਤਾ. ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਕੁੰਡਾ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਇਹਦੇ ਰਾਹੀਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕੋਠਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਹੋਣਗੇ। So this was the experience of Gyani Pradhan Singh Kotha Guru regarding Professor Harbans Singh. So and I would like just congratulate
Thank you.
Dr. Mahendra Singh ji for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to say a few words about Professor Harbans Singh. So really I'm very thankful to Dr. Mahendra Singh ji and all of you participating in this webinar. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Thank you, Professor Paramvir Singh ji. Now, with the permission of the chair, can I, S.Tarlochan Singh ji, can I invite Professor Mark Juergensmeyer to deliver this lecture?
Welcome, welcome.
Yes, sir. Now,
Welcome.
ball is in your court, Professor Mark Juergensmeyer. Time is yours. Speak your heart, speak your mind, whatever you want.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Paramvir Singh, for those comments. Thank you, S.Tarlochan Singh, for being the moderator. And thank my good friend, Mahendra Singh, for organizing this really wonderful occasion for a very distinguished and great scholar, Dr. Harbans Singh. It's an honor for me to be a part of this occasion. And I think all of you should be credited for reminding us of the kind of contributions that he made. I mean, after all, he came from Muxar without, with a huge background in academic training, and yet he went to Khalsa College in Amritsar, and then rose to the highest pinnacles of scholarship, helping to create a whole new university. And I think even more important for me in the field of comparative religion, helping to establish the very first department of religious studies in India, the very first department of comparative religion, and in part through his association with the Harvard Center for World Religions. And I think Wilfred Cantwell Smith, who was the eminent scholar, the director of that Harvard Center, actually came to Patiala to help inaugurate the department. So it's a very distinguished background. If that was not enough, his scholarly record in terms of his publications are truly dazzling. And they endure as a monument to his scholarship, not only the individual monographs, but crowned by the Encyclopaedia of Sikh Studies, which will stand as a monument. I'm very grateful that he invited me to write one of the items, one of the chapters in that encyclopedia. But despite that fact, many actual eminent scholars of Sikh studies are included in the encyclopedia, and it's become one of these touchstones works that all of us who work in the field are indebted to and grateful for and rely upon. And so the name Harbans Singh continues not just in our memory, but in our continuing reliance upon his resources and his creation, his academic achievements, both administrative and scholarly, for the kind of work that we do. So I should say a word about my involvement in Sikh studies and how I came to know Dr. Harbans Singh, which led to this volume, the Berkeley Studies lectures on Sikh studies, which my friend Mahendra Singh also played a role in its first publication. I had, after graduate school, I went to India on a kind of study scholarship where I ended up teaching at Punjab University. And at that time, I confess that I really knew very little about Sikhism, but I was just immediately taken with the richness of the tradition. And I think more importantly, on a personal level, being welcomed with the generosity and spirit, a generous spirit of Sikhs into their home and into their lives. And so when I returned to graduate school in Berkeley to complete my PhD, I was determined that the world should know about Sikhs and the world should know about the study of the Sikh community, both of its tradition and also its living heritage. So fortunately, I was given that opportunity because I then became the director of the program of religious studies at the University of California at Berkeley, and also the director of the graduate program in comparative religion in the adjacent and affiliated Graduate Theological Union. So I was the guy in charge of religious studies at Berkeley for many years. In that time, as Dr. Mohinder Singh mentioned, I came to know Dr. Kapani and worked together with him on a journal called the Sikh Sansar, and then the first conference on Sikh studies, the first conference ever in North America, in some ways launching that field. And along the line, of course, I knew the name of Harbans Singh. Anybody who was at least bit acquainted with the field of Sikh studies knew Harbans Singh. And I'm trying to remember whether actually I knew his children, Guninder Kaur, Nikki Singh, Nikki Guninder Kaur Singh, and her brother, Rupinder Singh. I may have known them actually before I knew Harbans Singh. They'll probably refresh my memories and tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, you're right.
But I think I knew them first, and of course they end up in the United States as scholars and as professionals. And I continue to meet with from time to time with my colleague Nikki, who is on her own right a great scholar, and of course Rupinder's work in Sikh studies is also important. And even though he's not currently in academia, he has left a legacy that that his father would be proud of. So I learned about the opportunity to have Harbans Singh come to Berkeley and give lectures. And as I said, I was in the position then to be able to arrange for him to give a series of lectures on Sikh studies. And for me, this was important for a couple of reasons. As I said, part of my mission was to make certain that the field of Sikh studies was not a forgotten tradition, which is actually the title of an article that I wrote in the first conference on Sikh studies, kind of surveying all of the works on world religion and comparative religion that scarcely mention Sikhism or regarded as some sort of synthesis between Hinduism and Islam, which I knew was not the case. And I knew it deserved to have the kind of prominence that at the time it didn't have. And so Dr. Harbans Singh was delighted that someone of his eminence and his scholarly achievement could be present to help develop the field of Sikh studies in North America. And so he came and gave these lectures, which were extremely well received, in part because they were so accessible. I mean, Harbans Singh had the kind of touch that a lot of us scholars wish we would have. And that is to take the depth of scholarship on the one hand, and to put it in a form that is accessible, where everyone can understand what he's talking about. There's no gibberish, there's no academic jargon, just plain talk and straightforward, informative background about the nature of the field, about the history and the development of Sikhism. And it's no surprise that these lectures given in Berkeley many years ago, and then first published through the support of my friend Mohinder Singh, have become an enduring part of the library of Sikh studies. It's one of the first resources that people turn to when they want to understand the Sikh tradition. And I'm delighted to know that this is true not only in North America, where he first gave the lectures, and that was the audience to which it was attended, but also in India and around the world. So it really has left an enduring impact. And that occasion also, for me, it was a great reward just to get to know Harbans Singh as a person. What a delightful person. I feel sorry for anybody who didn't have a chance to know him, just as a kind of warm-hearted, on the one hand, very knowledgeable, but on the other hand, very welcoming person. He would never take any question as too simple or too simple-minded. He would even Americans who knew nothing about Sikhism and would ask questions that seemed to be trivial. Why do you wear a turban? You know, he would take that as a serious question, and he would help people understand the significance of the kesh and why it's not just the turban, but the hair and everything that means, and to go into the history of it. That took a question that some of us thought, oh my goodness, this is embarrassing. You know, it's a trivial, ordinary question, but he took it seriously and dignified not just the question, but the person who was asking the question. So that, I think that says a lot, you know, that kind of magnanimity of spirit. I've tried to learn from that myself, that you should never, you know, sometimes you get frustrated with undergraduates and kind of simple questions they ask, but remember, we were all undergraduates once. You know, we all asked simple questions, and he had the ability to embrace anyone and take them where they were, and to help enlarge upon whatever simple knowledge that they had. So he helped to launch the field of Sikh studies in North America, which is what I'd like to talk about just a bit with the remainder of my time. You know, I think one of the last times I was privileged to speak at the Paramvir Singh Sahitya Sadan, I gave a lecture on the development of Sikh studies as a field. And you may have forgotten that lecture, but I remember it. And I remember that I talked about 3 phases of the development of Sikh studies. And I'd like to take that approach and apply it to Sikh studies in North America. And what I said, and I think it's still true, was that, and I've lived through all of those stages. When I was first teaching at Punjabi University, and I first got interested in Sikh studies, that's more than 50 years ago, a long time. The reason why Sikh studies was a forgotten tradition, as I called it, in that paper I wrote for the first conference on Sikh studies in North America, was it was seen just as a kind of provincial religious custom within one province of India. So Sikhism was regarded as a South Asian religion, as a variant of South Asian religiosity, that one studied in the context of South India. We look in the context of India. And so you had to understand that Indian context, both socially and theologically, and the background with the Bhakti tradition and all of the different spiritual leaders that came before, and interface with other religious traditions in the area, including Islam. And that's how people thought of Sikhism. And that's why in the books in comparative religion, it was often neglected. And I think this is also true of some of the first scholarship of Sikh studies in North America. It was often good scholarship. I'm thinking of Hugh MacLeod, who is often pilloried as being misleading in the kind of judgments and assessments he made, and perhaps that's correct. He was a pioneer in his own way. But his focus was primarily on the origins and the early history of the tradition. And scholars such as Jerry Berrier at the University of Missouri, an early scholar in Sikh studies, was a historian who dealt with later aspects of Sikh history, but again, primarily in the context of the Punjab. Paul Wallace at the University of Missouri also was an early scholar, a political scientist. But you saw the Sikh tradition largely in that Punjab context. So the early scholarship on Sikh studies in North America was conducted by scholars who were scholars of India in general, of South Asia in general, and saw Sikhism as an aspect of that, of the religious phenomena of the subcontinent. But then that began to change. And I think Harbans Singh had something to do with it, the impact of his lectures. I'd like to think that the initiative that Dr. Kapani and I started in developing the first conference on Sikh studies in the United States in 1976, and our book on Sikh studies, which is the first book on the field that came out of that. I'd like to think that also had a difference. But to tell you the truth, the real difference were Sikhs themselves, because this was a period of great migration and great change. In the mid-1980s, there was a dramatic change in the US immigration laws. And whereas many of the early Punjabi immigrants, most early Sikhs, were farmers who were in the Yuba City, Marysville area of the Central Valley of California, the parts of the West Coast. I mean, they played a very important role. These were, after all, the people who supported the Ghadar Party and the very important movement in India's independence. But the first Gurdwara in North America was in California, in Stockton. And it was in Stockton, which is not the major metropolitan area of California, because that's the center of the rural area of the San Joaquin Valley, very rich, fertile area, much like the Punjab, and irrigated, much like the Punjab, particularly Western Punjab was, and often by Sikhs who knew irrigation. They knew how to do this, and they became really remarkably successful. And to this day, they've become very successful farmers and developers in agriculture in this area. But in the 1980s, a different crowd came, more professionals, more scientists, a different group of Sikhs came to the United States with different interests, and were able to kind of influence the urban centers of the United States, I think, in a way that the earlier community had not. Nothing against, by any means, the earlier community. It's just that that's a part of the phenomenon of urban and academic interaction and the kind of influence. They often came from academic fields, including Dr. Kapani himself, who was a physicist. This is Narendra Singh Kapani, the founder of the Sikh Foundation in the United States. He was born in Moga, came from Punjab, but then he went to London, and then he became a physicist who was a pioneer in laser technology, excuse me, not laser technology, but
fiber optics.
Yeah, fiber optics.
Fiber
He was
optics.
regarded as the father of fiber
Yeah.
optics. You know, I think of light shooting through space, but in his case, it was light shooting through fiber cables. Because he was once told as a graduate student that light can't bend. He was determined to show that's wrong, light can bend. In fiber optic cables, it does. And of course, without those fiber optic cables that Dr. Kapani helped develop, we wouldn't have computers, we wouldn't have all kinds of modern communication. He really was an extraordinarily important pioneer in this field. But he was also dedicated to the field of Sikh studies and helped to create that field. So it's this kind of vision and this kind of this community of Sikhs and their impact on the academic community in the United States, along with, I modestly say, some of us in academia who felt it was important to have Sikh studies taught as a credible field within the academic discourse, that courses in Sikh studies began to be taught, and more importantly, positions in Sikh studies were founded. One of the first was at British Columbia, UBC. Harjot Singh was there for a time. That became a disputed chair. But then others developed. Probably the one that has endured was the one that Dr. Kapani founded at the University of California at Santa Barbara. Why Santa Barbara? Well, that's because by that time I had gone to Santa Barbara. I was at Berkeley for some 15 years, and then I came to the University of Hawaii to be a dean of there. And then my wife had gone to Santa Barbara, so I came to Santa Barbara. You don't need to know all those details. But when I got to Santa Barbara, I was involved in starting a whole new field of global studies, and I contacted Narendra and I said, look, we've been trying to create Sikh studies at Berkeley. We had difficulty doing that. During the 80s, a lot of the people in India studies didn't want to touch Sikhism. They thought this is not going to reflect well on them, which I thought was ridiculous. But when I got to Santa Barbara, I told Kapani, I said, look, I'm in a position now, we can have a position in Sikh studies. What about it? And so he said, great. And he went with it, and a chair was established in the memory of his mother. And so we have the first, Kapani chair at Santa Barbara, but also then at Riverside, a chair in Sikh studies, University of California at Riverside, University of California at Santa Cruz, University of California at Irvine, a chair in Sikh studies at Michigan, chairs in Sikh studies now in different places throughout North America. And courses in Sikh studies now taught not all over North America, but all over UK, other places in Europe. It's a whole new generation of Sikh studies. It's no longer just in the Punjab. Sikh studies now is rightfully considered as a world religion alongside other world religions. I mean, there are more Sikhs in the world than there are Jews. No one would think of Judaism as not being a world religion. Well, Sikh studies now and Sikhism as a field is recognized as being related to one of the world's great religious traditions, as it should be. And courses on Sikh studies are taught independently for their own sake, as are, of course, the chairs in Sikh studies that have been established to teach them. So this was a huge development in the development of Sikh studies in North America. And as part of this what I call the second phase of Sikh studies throughout the world, and that is the shift from the study of Sikhism as a regional religion, as a Punjab religion, as a South Asia religion, to a world religion, a comparative religion. And that has been a very important step indeed. But now it seems to me we're poised at the edge of a third phase of Sikh studies. Poised at a third phase of Sikh studies internationally throughout the world, but also in North America. And that's the study of Sikhism, not just as a world religion, but as a global religion. And what do I mean by that? Well, to consider a tradition a world religion, it means that we consider it to have a kind of character and a viability and integrity of its own that are equal to the other great religious traditions of humankind. That is worthy of study on its own, and it's worthy of understanding its origins and its roots and its history, its community that's associated with it. And that continues to be the case. That continues to be important. It's not like that's going to disappear, nor should it be. Global religion is to see a tradition like that in the context of multicultural societies and an increasingly multicultural world. And to see how Sikhism interacts with other religious traditions and how the Sikh community interacts with other people from other traditions in this kind of rich tapestry of what is developing into a global civil society and a global religion that is multicultural, that has many different characteristics, many different roots. And you can see that politically in Canada and North America with the prominence of people from Sikh background. There are now, 4 cabinet members in Canada who are Sikhs. That's more than in the Indian government. I guess there are more Sikhs in the Canadian cabinet than any other country in the world. Proudly, these are Sikhs that proudly are bearers of the signs of their community. And also in the United States, a number of Sikhs that have risen into prominence who are spokespeople on television. There's a high-ranking Republican governor who was for the time ambassador to the UN under the Trump administration, who, although kind of disguises her Sikh background, nonetheless comes from, I think, an Alawalia family from Firozpur. And so there is a kind of interaction that has not been the case before. There's a huge parade in California at the significant Sikh holidays. And I've noticed in recent years that the American flag is always very prominently displayed in these marches, because these are Sikhs who are very proud to be Sikhs, and they're very proud to be Americans. And I'm delighted to say that finally the US government has allowed soldiers who are Sikhs, American soldiers, to wear their turbans, not to have to hide them. That we're recognizing, the US is recognizing increasingly that it is a multicultural community, not just for Christians and Jews, but also for Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists, and most importantly for our conversation for Sikhs. And so as these communities, these multicultural communities embrace various religious traditions, the traditions themselves struggle with two things. One is to retain their integrity, retain what is central and true and distinctive about their tradition, and impart it to the younger generation. At the same time, and this is also important, that particularly the younger generation, is able to interact with other people to fully embrace the culture, their host culture, in this case, the United States, and be proud American citizens, but to wear their Sikh cultural heritage as Americans, not as foreigners, as not an alien religion. Sikhism in the United States is an American religion. And this, I think, is the global religion of the future. And we're increasingly coming into an era where I think all religious traditions will have this kind of global characteristic. And you can see it in the kind of work that currently is being done in the field of Sikh studies. I think I told you that many years ago, Dr. Kapani and I were involved in establishing the first conference in Sikh studies in the 1970s to bring together scholars in Sikh studies. Well, just a few weeks ago, just right before his sudden and untimely death, Narendra called me on the phone, and he said, "Mark," in his distinctive voice, which I immediately recognized who it was. He didn't have to tell me who it was. "This is Narendra Kopani." Yes, I know. Of course, I can hear your voice. I know who you are. He said, and he reminded me of what we did in the 1970s. And he said, "It's time has come again to take the temperature of Sikh studies in North America." So he said, at the time, we can't have a conference now in the era of COVID and the pandemic. We can't physically bring people together. But we can do something just as good. We can do what Mohinder is doing right now and bringing us together on Zoom. We can bring us together in virtual space. And we can have a series of meetings, of conversations with people who are doing Sikh studies in all kinds of ways, different ways. Doing whether it's chairs or have a whole program in Sikh studies, or whether they're just the only person in the university, and trying to find out what they're doing and the different ways in which Sikh studies is conceived. And Narendra said also, he said, "I'd like to ask you to be the moderator." And so I have to explain at the beginning of these, everything of these conversations, why this non-Sikh guy is leading this conversation on Sikh studies. And I have to tell him, I love Sikh studies. I'm so proud of the way in which it's developed. And besides, Dr. Kapani asked me, and I never tell him no to anything that he has asked. So we've had this series, we've now had about half a dozen of them. There'll be another one tomorrow. And in each case, I ask the kind of the last question I ask the person in the conversation is, how do you describe the field of Sikh studies. And one of the reasons I asked them is that I remember that back at the beginning, that we thought of Sikh studies as a study of the text of the Guru Granth Sahib or the Dasam Granth and early Sikh history, the lives of the gurus. And then maybe we got bold, we would, go to Ranjit Singh or maybe, some actually went to the Singh Sabha and the rise of modern forms of Sikhism. But it was primarily textual and historical. And what has impressed me is the great diversity of the way Sikh studies is now conceived. Yeah, some of it is still textual and historical. Thank goodness, that's wonderful. That is at the rock center of the study of any religious tradition. But there are also sociological studies of the diaspora communities and their interaction with other communities. There are also political studies of the kind of political posture that Sikhs have taken. There are economic studies of the role of impact of different economic changes in the Sikh community. There's studies of Sikh art and the way in which that is conceived, not just within the Punjab, but around the world. The person I'm going to be talking with tomorrow studies Sikh music and the way that Gurbani is done differently in different places and how that's done in North America that may be different from the Punjab. So this is Sikh studies, this is Sikhi, this is a larger sense of what it means to be a Sikh and what Sikhism is as a tradition. And the reason why it is so diverse and it's studied in such diverse ways is that because Sikhism is increasingly a global religion and increasingly it's studied as a global religion. And what a monumental and important shift this was. And in thinking about this, I thought about Harbans Singh and how he would have been right there in the middle of it. Because if you look at his work, yeah, some of it begins with the tradition and the historical roots of the tradition, but it was about so much more. And it was about the whole life of the community. And then to create a Department of Religious Studies in which Sikhism would be a part of the community of faiths. That long before the rest of us even thought about it, long before the rest of us even had a name for it, he was doing global religion. He was thinking of Sikhism globally. So I think that's a nice place to end this conversation because I've been talking about Sikhism in North America, but also the kind of enduring impact that Harbans Singh has had on the field in general, but also in the way it has helped to shape the study of Sikhism increasingly as a global religion. So Mohinder, I want to thank you for inviting me, and I would appreciate anyone who wants to contact me to continue this conversation, but it was a delight to be here and to be a part of this great tribute to a great man.
Mark, I do not have words to sufficiently thank you. And you have been a great friend of the Sikh community. On a rather short notice, I know Mark was busy, he had invited guests. I said, no, Mark, you can't say no for Professor Harbans Singh. And he said, okay, then he fixed the time. I said, time is fine.
Yes.
And Mark, I think you made a very important point towards the end, taking the temperature of Sikh studies. I think we need to fulfill Kapani's wish. It is time Sikh studies have taken, its proper shape. That criticism is over, and I meet my old critics and friends. They realize they were wrong. With the passage of time, wisdom has prevailed. And my dream has been, and Mark, you'll be the right person because you are accepted. I don't know why. Everywhere as a friend, take the initiative of hosting a conference, maybe in Delhi or maybe in your part of the world, where all of us with our differences intact, Peshawar Singh, Gurinder Maan, and Murphy, and their critics under one roof, let us follow Guru Nanak's dream. Let us fulfill his dream. Guru Nanak conceived Sikhism as a global religion, not a Sikh religion, not meant for village or province. And time has come to fulfill Guru's message of making this an academic global religion. You talked of music. Daya Singh is doing wonderful things in Australia. All Westerns are enjoying the music. In India, my Baldeep Singh is doing great things. So we need, I think, at some stage, with all our differences, evaluate where we are, what is our next step, and we will greatly value your advice, Mark. You are a great man, but carry your greatness very modestly, very humbly. We're grateful to you for sharing your thoughts, and paying a rich tribute to your old friend and our source of inspiration, Professor Harbans Singh. With this now, I request S.Tarlochan Singh to give his presidential remarks, and thereafter I'll thank, and I request for the audience, I'll give the address and email of Mark on the internet. They'll be happy to ask him questions. I think he is very, very quick in responding. Thank you, Mark. Over to S.Tarlochan Singh.
Thank you, Dr. Mahendra Singh. First of all, while paying tributes to Professor Harbans Singh, my friend, on his first birth centenary, I must thank Mahendra Singh that he is the one among us who not only remembers, but he takes on himself that what to do. He published a book on Dr. Ganda Singh. Today he is organizing this seminar. Earlier, when 100 years of tragedy of Nankana Sahib, he is the one who came out with all the articles, information. So God bless him that he is doing this great service. Secondly, the lecture by Professor Mark, I think there are no words how to thank him. He has come out with all his memories with Professor Harbans Singh, but the later part, he has come out with such brilliant ideas for all of us. I remember Professor Harbans Singh once called a meeting in Patiala of all the American scholars who are doing research work on Punjab and Sikhs. There used to be some organization in America of all of them, and they used to meet annually. And once he called that meeting in Patiala also. So at that time, I have been thinking, telling people where that organization has gone now. Now I don't think there is any such thing, which is Dr. Kapani. I attended his last seminar before his death when he called for the inauguration of the museum gallery in the Asia Museum. So recently I had talked with his daughter Kiki. She and her brother are all agreeable that they will carry on the torch of Dr. Kapani. And so I think the idea Professor Mark has given, that it's the high time that the Sikhs should come forward. Because now he has told, now that this is a new subject, he says, the Sikhs, economically, where we have reached. There's a very good question he has brought to us. Nobody has given this study, that Sikhs all over the Canada, USA, economically what we have done and where we have reached. So there are very good subjects, and it's a high time we appreciate and organize. Now about Professor Harbans Singh, actually I came to know him. You will be amazed. I was posted as PR of Bhakra Dam in 1958 onwards. The Nandpur Sahib was very close to Bhakra Dam, and every tourist coming to Bhakra Dam used to go to Anandpur Sahib. At that time, there was no literature. So the first booklet I saw was City of Bliss by Professor Harbans Singh. That was in 1958. So that's how I came to know him. Secondly, it was in Nabha in, I think, 67, when the relics of Nabha Palace, you see, Professor Harbans Singh organized that these relics of Guru Gobind Singh should be placed separately in the Nabha Palace. So that function, Governor Dharamvira came, and I was at that time posted in Patiala. So I was the state secretary. So there we first time met, and from that day onward, we carried our friendship. I met him in Washington many times to his, and I am aware that it is Professor Harbans Singh who, as Dr. Mahendra Singh has described earlier, the books he has written, actually a book, The Sikh Heritage, is like a good historian. I think we read Khushwant Singh, Sikh history, Patwant Singh, Ganda Singh, Dr. Gopal Singh, but the Sikh Heritage, written by Professor Harbans Singh, which are now revised edition also he published, that gives so much material, factual story of the Sikhs in this book, like a complete history book. So I admire him. His book, Dr. Mahendra Singh mentioned about book on Guru Gobind Singh. Now recently, we were thinking of a book I discussed with him on Guru Nanak, because Government of India is agreed to publish a book in all world languages, which should go, and we were thinking of book of Professor Harbans Singh on Guru Nanak. So that is what is his contribution. Now the Sikh Encyclopedia, I think after Bhai Khan Singh, I think he is the second Sikh, because Khan Singh did all that Mahan Kosh, and he is the one who wrote inside. And he completed it in spite of falling health. And all 4 volumes, I am lucky in the sense that I promised him, Dr. Mahendra Singh is aware, that once it is complete, the Prime Minister of India will release it. So I fulfilled that promise. Atal Bihari Vajpayee released all the 4 volumes of Encyclopedia in Parliament House in XC, and at that time we all paid tribute to others. So now I feel the first Sikh scholar by Gurdas in 17th century. Then coming on, you see all scholars by Khan Singh, by Veer Singh. Now this last century, Professor Harbans Singh, Ganda Singh, all others. But the biggest legacy of Professor Harbans Singh is his daughter, a living legend. Nikki Grinder is the one now who has written a book on Guru Nanak, the first Sikh. So Professor Harbans Singh has left to us, you see, in her, that she is now contributing. She is now, I've been assigned that Harvard University is coming out with Gurbani of Guru Nanak, which she is translating. So we are all very happy that Professor Harbans Singh, you see, at a young age, Professor Mark, he was a tutor to the royal family of Faridkot, and must be at age of 20 to 30 at that time. Yeah. A man born in a village, Kota Guru, being teacher of the Prince of Faridkot and all the princesses. So he was a tutor to the Faridkot royal family. And then he was a close friend to Maharaja Amrinder Singh. Actually, if I remember that Maharaja Yadvinder Singh used to consult Professor Harbans Singh on every matter. Wherever there was Professor Harbans Singh. So Sir Harbans Singh, a humble man, SGPC gave him award with a handsome money of rupees 50,000. He refused, no money. He was appointed Vice Chancellor, Guru Nanak Dev University. He refused. He said, no, I am to complete encyclopedia. So such a humble man, such a humble man. And last of all, Dr. Mahendra Singh ji, Professor Harbans Singh used to have a painting of Hari Singh Nalwa.
That's right.
In his room. And he told me this is the only original painting of Hari Singh Nalwa, the biggest Sikh general. And that painting I saw when I went to Colby College. Now I got a copy of that painting, and I am installing that in the Hari Singh Nalwa hostel, which Khalsa College, of which I am chairman, which is now being inaugurated on 12th of this. So Professor Harbans Singh is still a living legend for us. God bless him. God bless all our scholars to learn from him. And more such functions which Dr. Mahendra Singh has done today, Punjab University, Patiala University, Amritsar University should organize. And I must admire Professor Mark. You are a real friend of the Sikhs, and God bless you. You must help the Sikhs also in America. Now the music now in Hofstra University, there is a Sikh music chair. I've been there, very interesting. And the meeting which you were telling, last year, Hofstra University organized one such sitting. They invited about 20 scholars of America from different Sikh chairs. And there was 3 days conference on that. So similarly, we should do that. So now more, I am happy Dr. Mahendra Singh has also given me this opportunity to pay tribute to my old friend Harbans Singh. And let us all then resolving, thanking Professor Mark again, thanking Dr. Mahendra Singh and all those who are listening. God bless us. Sikhs are meant to help, provide, and we are the most God-loved children to help others. For us, Nanak Name Chaddi Kala, Tere Bane Sarbat Ka Bhala. Thank you.
Last few words. I think you will agree with me. Professor Bansing was a very wise man, and he took a wise decision not to become a vice chancellor. There's so many vice chancellors who don't know their names. But Harbans will live because of encyclopedia. He will never die because of this 4 volume. Everyone has to consult. He made a wise decision to ensure that he becomes immortal, and he remains immortal. This is our tribute to him. And I again thank S.Tarlochan Singh ji for finding time. He had other engagements. I said, no, you have to spare this time for me. He luckily joined us. Mark, I have no words again to thank you. And Professor Paramvir Singh, and also the audience which is listening, they can hear us. We can't see them, but I'm sure they'll enjoy Mark's lecture, and do hope there'll be opportunity to listen to Mark again. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji.
Great. Thank you.